G'day, mate. 40 here. Some very exciting times ahead. Art Bell, all right, a real friend of this channel. He's given me hundreds of topics to talk about, and he was raising the obvious topic of with the increase in work from home, which is particularly strong in Los Angeles and in New York City and San Francisco. All right, commercial real estate is absolutely crashing in value, and there are going to be some complications from this. All right, the commercial real estate industry is headed for some very difficult times. We're going to have a lot of bankruptcies in the commercial real estate sector, and this is a significant part of what is known as shadow banking. So we're talking about hedge funds. We're talking about open-ended money market funds. All right, they are now pulling out of key credit markets. They're forcing the government to intervene to try to stabilize things. So the COVID shock reaffirmed the significance of structural vulnerabilities in non-banks. That's Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen. So there are all these ways that U.S. regulators are now trying to better monitor hedge fund leverage and address liquidity mismatches in open-end hedge funds and money markets. So these sectors can, when under pressure, absolutely break the buck, leave small investors with huge losses. And the next sector of our finance industry to go into spasm is going to be shadow banks. All right, this is the real risk. All right, we've got all this trouble brewing in commercial property loans. I'm looking at the Financial Times. We've got all this problem in private equity real estate funds. Have you heard over the last 10 years all about private equity funds buying houses, all right, going into the rental business? All right, they increasingly own more and more of our real economy. All right, so you've got the shadow banks, you got the small banks, you got the regional banks. All right, small banks hold 70% of all commercial real estate loans, and the growth of this has tripled since 2021. And now small banks, regional banks, people are fleeing from regional banks. They're pulling their funds out of regional banks after the Silicon Valley Bank crash because they are concerned that there's not going to be, sufficient backstop to ensure their deposits. So in 2019, we had the easing of Dodd-Frank rules for community banks, and smaller financial institutions have always invested in more riskier assets, usually owned by private equity and hedge funds. All right. So do other institutions looking for better returns, including pension funds. So small bank funding to commercial real estate is now tightening. All right. We've got rising interest rates. We've got downward pressure on commercial property values, right? They're now way below pre-COVID pandemic levels. So this will curtail capital flows. It will derail investment. It will put pressure on private equity funds who now have a whole bunch of loans maturing, and they're going to need either equity injections or they're going to have to sell in desperation, right? So asset managers are either going to go to investors for more capital this year, which will be very tough to negotiate at the moment, or they're going to have to sell their property out to cover their loans. We're talking about a doom loop, all right? Big real estate indices have already turned negative, right? They turned negative last year. So last month, the Canadian property group Brookfield stopped making payments on $734 million of Los Angeles office building debt. Right, there's elevated short interest in real estate investment funds such as Hudson Pacific Properties, Vornado Realty. So we're going to see all sorts of other vulnerabilities coming to the fore, all right, in the financial system, particularly in regional banks, shadow banks. So rich non-bank asset managers such as Blackstone, Apollo, Carlyle, right, they've all gone huge into real estate, residential, commercial real estate in the wake of 2008. Right, they were able to make deals the regulated banks couldn't. So private equity players have made all sorts of new investments in utilities, farmland, transportation, energy renewables, as well as commercial real estate, residential real estate, right? And so this combination of falling real estate values, higher interest rates, a credit crunch is going to mean we're going to see some high-profile defaults, and we're going to see a curtain pulled up on what private equity and global asset management is being up to the last few years. And there's a book about this very topic coming out this month, all right, by a political economist, Brett Christophers, Our Lives in Their Portfolios, Why Asset Managers own the world, right? We've moved from financialized capitalism to an asset manager society. So we've got the titans of finance now own essential physical systems and frameworks, such as the homes in which we live, the buildings where we work, the power systems that light our cities, and the hospitals where we die. And this is all being sped up by post-COVID fiscal stimulus plans, which have encouraged more public-private infrastructure partnership, like the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act for America, right? Had much less public investment than was initially proposed, but has a whole bunch of new concessions for private investment. So we've got Chief Executive of Brookfield Asset Manager saying in this new book, what we do is behind the scenes. Nobody knows we're there. You're going to know they're there very soon, right? The problems of private equity in residential real estate, right? You're going to learn a lot more about that in the weeks and months ahead. We've got a looming crisis in commercial real estate. In half the country, we've got plunging residential real estate prices. We're going to get a much closer look at highly leveraged bricks and mortar empires built by shadow banks and what risks posed by the privatization of these assets. And let's look at the chat. Kyle Fan says, I've been watching the Scuffed Realtor live stream. It's the best. We need a hot capital injection. Bernard says it's going to be inconvenient if your local bank goes bankrupt. Even if you are made whole, you may have to go months or years without your savings. Elliot says burn it down. Bernard says bailouts will not help the inflation going on. Another Financial Times article, U.S. regional banks reduced cash buffers ahead of a run on deposits. So there's been this massive run on deposits for regional banks over the past month. And just before that, regional banks dramatically reduced their cash buffers. Right? They're completely unprepared for mass withdrawals as they adjust to higher interest rates. So the largest U.S. regional banks began 2023 with less cash on hand than at any time since the 2008 financial crisis. They are ill-prepared for a rush on deposit withdrawals, the very thing that led to the collapse of Silicon Valley Bank and Signature Bank. Right, so 30 banks with assets between $50 billion and $250 billion cut the percentage of their assets held in cash to an average of 7% at the start of 2023 from 13% the year before. Right, that's less than half the cash held by the nation's largest and more strictly regulated lenders such as Citigroup and JP Morgan Chase. Why would you not put your deposits in Citigroup, JP Morgan Chase, Bank of America right now? Why would you leave it in a regional bank? Right, the big banks have 15% of their assets in cash. So regional banks are highly vulnerable to these deposit outflows. They can be much more easily destabilized by losses on forced sales of their securities to give customers back their cash. And so this is driving a panic in bank stocks. These low levels of cash marked a sharp drop from the first year of the pandemic. Right, so the Federal Reserve is setting out to fight inflation. It's getting tougher for smaller banks to find profits. So they started moving assets that they were holding in cash and earning nothing into bonds that paid modest interest outcome. But then this risked losses should the bank need those funds to repay depositors, something that had not been a concern for years until it suddenly was. So more and more depositors are asking for their money back, and regional banks are in a very difficult position. So it'll be interesting to keep an eye on this. Okay. Pretty concerning. It appears that some Democrats are spreading election misinformation. Hillary Clinton, Nancy Pelosi, oh no.
We all know how hard it is to start a new chapter in life. And if you're crooked, who spent most of her career either bleaching emails or running for president, starting a new teaching gig at Columbia might feel a little bit overwhelming at first. So today, one of Crooked's besties, Nancy Pelosi, paid her a visit, girl power, hoping that maybe it'll break the ice for her. And just like old friends, they complimented each other's outfits.
Nancy has been really the avatar of that for Washington for so long. And she's been able to do it in these ridiculously high heels. I mean, truly, if I didn't love her, I would hate her. I mean, purple, they're at least 6 inches. I mean, stiletto doesn't describe them.
And they talked about their recent vacations.
Tell us a little bit about both of those decisions to visit Ukraine.
To tell you the honest truth, it was pretty scary. Without going into the details of the logistics and all of that, I thought we could possibly die, but it's for democracy.
So what's she so afraid of? I mean, San Francisco is more dangerous than Ukraine at this point. But Nance didn't go all the way to Colombia just to talk about heels and vacations. She went to New York to talk about Hillary's favorite topic, how Russia stole the 2016 election.
It was her clarity and position to the President Putin, present occupant leader of Russia, that made him turn around and ensure, in a illegal way, come out against her in her campaign. An interference in our democracy by Vladimir Putin, because Hillary Clinton was the person he feared most in terms of his lack of democracy in Russia.
Nothing gets Hillary going like talking about Russian interference. She can go on and on.
A guy who had been one of the main, I guess he was one of the main people running memes against me in 2016. But he went from that to running a very deliberate effort to mislead people about where and how to vote. Yeah. So it went from speech to action meant to subvert the election, because thousands of people who they targeted through their algorithms, oh, I can text my vote for Hillary Clinton.
Yeah.
Thousands texted their vote.
Hillary started the Russia hoax, but some guy made a meme. We're getting the feeling Hillary hasn't moved on from her loss to Trump. Alvin Bragg probably influenced the election more than...
Okay, that's ridiculous that Hillary Clinton thinks that thousands of her voters tried to text their vote. My God, that's absurd. Okay, good article in the New York Times. Trump's prosecution has set a dangerous precedent. I mean, this you would think would incentivize all sorts of local district attorneys to start bringing charges on the basis of political calculations, right? Alvin Bragg may have been the first local prosecutor to do it. He will not be the last. So every local prosecutor in the country will now feel that he has free reign to criminally investigate, prosecute presidents after they leave office. Democrats currently cheering the charges may feel differently when President Biden ends up on the receiving end of a similar effort by any of the thousands of prosecutors elected to local office, eager to make a name for themselves by prosecuting former president of the United States. So the vast range, breadth, diversity of criminal laws throughout the country provide plenty of opportunity for mischief. So, yeah, Delaware is a solid Democratic state, but what if Joe Biden visits Florida or Texas, right? They have broad criminal laws on the books that prohibit various forms of financial and business improprieties. And if a president misled someone, right, in the state during a financial transaction, or if the president used a financial institution in that state for some questionable dealing, they could get prosecuted. Let's say a president ran a business or a nonprofit that perhaps inflated its financial condition to secure office space. Right, that could form the basis of an investigation into whether he committed a crime by fraudulently obtaining property or credit. Right, so we could just see an onslaught of these prosecutions, and it wasn't necessary. Right, if Joe Biden wasn't so checked out, right, he would have told his attorney general to engage and to coordinate with Alvin Bragg and with the district attorney in Georgia who's investigating Trump in Fulton County, and let them know that the Biden Justice Department is conducting very thorough criminal investigations concerning Donald Trump's business dealings, concerning Donald Trump's efforts to overturn the 2020 election results. I mean, this is common. Federal prosecutors routinely ask state and local prosecutors to step aside when the underlying facts implicate federal laws or federal interests. They almost always agree to do so. Right, so Joe Biden could have alleviated the legal uncertainty and the controversy that surrounds Trump. He could have protected himself and his Democratic successors from retribution. But Joe Biden has not taken these steps. Right, he's left local prosecutors like Alvin Bragg with the license and even the imperative to pursue Trump for any questionable conduct in their jurisdiction. So this reminds me of the way Joe Biden reacted to Russia massing on Ukraine's borders and saying that they were going to invade unless there was some sort of agreement reached. Right? Joe Biden was checked out on the Russian invasion of Ukraine. He's checked out now on Alvin Bragg's indictment of Donald Trump, and both totally unnecessary. Right? It is completely normal for federal prosecutors to step in with local prosecutors and say, "Hey, we're doing a very thorough investigation. Please allow us, our lane to do this." All right? Joe Biden would have saved himself, his party, so much aggravation, the country so much aggravation, and he also just allowed Russia to march into Ukraine. Didn't engage with Russia. Didn't try to come to some kind of accord. Apparently didn't try to engage with Alvin Bragg. So the same sort of, checked out, attitude that has put us, on the verge of World War III in Europe, right? We very well get into some kind of shooting war with Russia, nuclear exchange with Russia, completely unnecessary. And you have a lot of concern about, violent conflict in the U.S. being sparked by this, what seems to be, haven't seen the indictment yet, but seems to be completely unnecessary, 100% politically motivated indictment of Donald Trump. Now, there's always going to be a political edge to what you choose to arrest people for. There's always tremendous subjectivity with how you enforce laws. But if Alvin Bragg's case is as weak as it looks right now, all right, then this is just going to unleash Republican prosecutor fury, all right, and just drive all sorts of chaos in this country. So you're probably thinking, what does Dennis Prager have to say about this?
Line we have crossed in this country and its history with the indictment of an ex-president on completely trivial matters over which almost any...
Yeah, it does. Right now, it does look trivial. I mean, we have to wait for the indictment to make a final proclamation, but that does seem fair.
Anybody who has been in business could be indicted. If you, for example, if you took a meal as a business expense and couldn't prove that was really a business meal, you could be charged with tax fraud.
That's right. There are so many rules and laws that we all routinely violate on a regular basis that if you have sufficient funds, right, you can prosecute anyone for anything. Right? There needs to be common sense. And, why not go after rapists and murderers as your top priority?
How seriously you could be charged with it, I don't know, I'm not a tax attorney, but you could be. It is on the level of that the man paid a woman to keep quiet. Do you remember the Clinton era when every Democrat and all of the Democratic Party media, New York Times, etc., their rhetoric was, it's only about sex. Remember that? And by the way, I happen to have had some sympathy for that argument. I did not call for Clinton's impeachment. I thought he should resign. And it was not over the sex, it was over the lying under oath. And that is a considerably more serious offense than paying a woman to keep quiet and who decided that she had not received enough. In my mind, she is the villain in that particular matter. No.
Stormy Daniels is the villain in that particular matter. That particular matter is so filthy. All right. This is like two people engaged in a swim in the sewer. All right. I find it really hard to proclaim either Donald Trump or Stormy Daniels the villain. Man. Look, that critical video of you with Stephen J. James and Claire Khaw gets hot 1 hour in. It is viewing gold. Okay. I couldn't have that normal life.
So what do you think about that, Claire Khaw? Thoughts? I'm just going to grab a drink.
That's his usual litany of excuses. I can't because then I would sacrifice all these birds and would otherwise.
Whoa. I mean, Claire Khaw, she can kill with a smile. She can wound with her eyes. She can ruin your faith with her casual lies. And she only reveals what she wants you to see. She hides like a child. But Claire Khaw, she's always a woman to me. Ooh. She can lead you to love. She can take you or leave you. She can ask for the truth, but she'll never believe you. And she'll take what you give her as long as it's free. She's always a woman to me.
I could have bedded. Yeah, I mean, you either have principles or you don't, and Luke doesn't, and there he is. He will be repellent to women, and this is why I keep going on. You know, he may have spent a lot of money on his teeth.
Spend a lot of money on my teeth. Okay, first of all, if it makes you feel good, spending a lot of money on your teeth, you know, for many people would be a good investment. I mean, I spend about $100 to $150 a year. I get a yearly or twice a year checkup on my teeth. If I have cavities, I get them filled, and that's the extent of my spending on my teeth. But if I did spend $20,000 on my teeth, if it made me feel good and it made you feel good, right? If I'm happy, the people around me are going to be happier and better off. Like, your happiness is a moral issue. So if you feel good about yourself, if you need to spend a little money on your teeth or whatever you need to feel happy, so long as it's not, you know, immoral, hurting other people, that's a good investment. I mean, Claire Khaw, she steals like a thief, but she's always a woman to me. Ooh, she takes care of herself. She can wait if she wants. She's ahead of her time. Oh, she never gives out and she never gives in. She just changes her mind.
And he has features that would be considered good looking, but you know, what woman would have anything to do with him? They would just instinctively be repulsed. That he has no principle.
Claire Khaw, you're...
You know,
Why would they be
I'm
repulsed?
giving you a woman's perspective, and you can't,
Why?
you know, what?
Why would they be repulsed by Luke? Luke's a fine-looking man.
Yeah,
there.
yes, I do not deny that he has even features, and he spent a lot of money on his teeth. But if you listen to the content of what he actually
You
said,
keep bringing up the
you will
teeth. What's
find
wrong with his
regret.
teeth? What's wrong with his teeth that you don't like?
I'm not saying yeah, he spent a lot of money on his teeth, and they're very white. And
Do you have bad teeth, Claire?
They
I've never had teeth whitening, but if I did and it made someone happier or made me happier, I mean, that would be a great investment. This is a hilarious line of critique. I mean, she'll promise you more than the Garden of Eden, then she'll carelessly cut you and laugh while you're bleeding. But she'll bring out the best and the worst you can be, blame it all on yourself, because she's always a woman to me. Yep, she takes care of herself. She can wait if she wants. She's ahead of her time. She never gives out and she never gives in. She just changes her mind.
bite very well.
Okay. Are you sexually frustrated by Luke? Do you feel like did he turn you down? Are you sexually...
No, I would never accept an offer from somebody like that. Anyway, you know, to
Why
somebody
not?
who obviously has
Tell us
no
more.
principles. He just is morally repugnant to me. And I think to most women with their, you know, brain screwed on. Brain still
Sex
in
is a
their skull.
mental... Sex is a mental endeavour with you, isn't it?
Well, you have to trust the person and not think that he's just, you know, a creep that is basically sleazy and doesn't get it about what women want.
He literally made a film called What Women Want, Claire Khaw. I've not watched it, have you?
Well, he obviously doesn't know what women want. They don't want a sleazebag who keeps saying that he was into porn.
Luke, you heard it here first.
But he's converted to Judaism. He, you know, I'm an Orthodox Jew. I converted to Orthodox Judaism, but I can't stop talking about my porn director days. I mean, there's something wrong there.
Look, so Devil's Advocate again, it was a big part of Luke's life, and it was the thing that first shot him to some notoriety. He was looking to make it big in Hollywood from the day that he was dropped off there on the plane or whatever, and he thought it was going to be like in acting or something, and
He can't act.
he can't act. This didn't work out for him. He ended up getting into journalism or whatever, got into the ladies, and Hollywood's a sleazy place. He probably went for the easy option of just talking about
Dumping.
pumping and dumping. But anyway, look, he got a break in terms of journalism, talking about the sleazy side of Hollywood. And look, who can knock him for... You could knock him more, is what I'm trying to say. You could feel worse about Luke if he attempted to hide it. Like, people bring this out today as an own. When I mention that, like, I was, it's probably not the right word, but like groomed into the alt-right through the Luke Ford sphere. But they're like saying, you know, he was a porn blogger, don't you? Like, that's some kind of own, but he's always owned it himself, so it can't be an own later. He's always been honest about it. He's not hidden it. That's part of his character. isn't it?
Yes,
And he's upfront.
you know,
He wears his faults on his
He's a
sleeve.
nihilist. I mean, that is the thing. I have no principles, and I'm proud I have no principles. And I am so unprincipled, I will convert to another religion and say I don't believe in all that shit. But, you know, I'll lead that life because I think it gives me a better, you know, so I can piss on you lot. And you know, you lot just wrap it up.
Brutal, Claire Khaw, brutal analysis there. Let's listen to a bit more.
Whoa. Painful. But she's always a woman to me.
Good evening and welcome to Tucker Carlson Tonight. Happy Monday. So here's a story from over the weekend. At about 5 a.m. on Saturday morning in Manhattan, a parking garage attendant called Musa Diarra noticed a man peering into parked cars looking for things to steal. Now that's a familiar scene in New York City. Alvin Bragg, who is the local Soros-funded DA, has decided that prosecuting car burglaries is a form of white supremacy. As a result, not surprisingly, car burglaries have risen quite a bit. Musa Diarra, the attendant, is not white, but apparently he's sick of watching other people get robbed, so he told the man to get out, leave the garage. In response, the man pulled out a handgun and fired 4 times. He hit Diarra in the head and the stomach. It was a nightmare. But somehow, Musa Diarra had the presence of mind to wrestle the gun from the man and then fire back before the man could shoot him or anyone else. By the time police arrived, both men were lying on the sidewalk bleeding. Now, what do you think happened next? In a sane, self-respecting society, Musa Diarra would have received a medal, if not a ticker tape parade. But in the city of New York, he was arrested and charged with attempted murder and illegal possession of a gun, the same gun that had been used to shoot him. Diarra woke up in Bellevue Hospital shackled to his bed. The New York Post ran this picture. It's of him sobbing. "I got bullets in me and I'm chained to a hospital bed," he said, "but I didn't do anything wrong." You can imagine his confusion. This was not the country he expected. And in fact, Musa Diarra is exactly the kind of person you want more of in your country. He's 57 years old and he's still working harder than most young people do. In fact, when New York shut down during COVID, as lawyers and nonprofit executives hid in their apartments, living on DoorDash and stockpiling surgical masks from Amazon, Diarra went to work every day, like Americans used to. The man who shot him, by contrast, does not have a history of going to work every day. His name is Charles Rody. We checked. He's got a rap sheet of nearly a dozen serious crimes that go back more than 20 years. And yet, as of Saturday at 5 a.m., he was not in jail. He was walking around New York with a gun looking for more things to steal. In the end, Alvin Bragg caved to public outrage, which was considerable, and dropped the charges against Musa Diarra. But he had already made the point very clear to everyone. In our new Soros-inspired justice system, decent people are the criminals, while the criminals are now a protected class. Here's how it works. The people in charge unleash chaos in our cities, but if you dare to protect yourself or your family from that chaos, you wind up in handcuffs. What is this? Well, the name of this system of governance is anarcho-tyranny. You get state-sponsored anarchy accompanied by political tyranny. Since taking office, Bragg has done his best to increase the anarchy. He's increased the number of felony charges his office drops by nearly 40%. That includes almost half of all drunk driving charges. It's no longer really a crime to drive drunk in New York City. That's the anarchy part. But for those who step outside the political lines, it is tyranny. You'll remember the middle-aged bodega clerk called Jose Alba from the Dominican Republic. Bragg sent him to Rikers Island, one of the worst prisons in the world, for daring to defend himself against a lunatic who was trying to murder him. So now this very same system, the system that imprisoned Jose Alba and chained Musa Diarra to his hospital bed, this Soros-inspired and backed system, is putting Joe Biden's main political opponent in the upcoming presidential race on trial for a crime that's not actually a crime. This is the political tyranny part of anarcho-tyranny. So for our existing legal system, this appears to be a point of no return. And you would think the media would point that out. Even if they support it, this is a big change from the way the country has run for hundreds of years. But no, because they're too dumb, too shallow, and above all, too self-interested. So Trump's upcoming arraignment tomorrow isn't a turning point in our country's legal system. It's yet another chance to follow Trump around in the hope that ratings will return. This was CNN all day today.
I'm being told right now that is Donald Trump leaving Mar-a-Lago on his way to catch his plane that will leave to New York, where he'll arrive later this afternoon. We're watching really history right now unfold on your screen. Donald Trump en route to the airport and a court date in New York, becoming the first ever former president to face a criminal indictment.
Look, this is a historic moment. We just watched the former president of the United States, or a former president of the United States, leave his home, headed to New York to be arraigned in court.
We're watching on our screen as Trump's motorcade has now arrived on the tarmac at Palm Beach International Airport.
Heading up in the air and heading back to his home state of New York. Certainly not the kind of homecoming that he had ever imagined when he went back from Florida to New York, but he is heading back on a historic flight. Again, not necessarily a part of history that Donald Trump or any former president would want to make. One of the things that we have learned is to not put everything at an 11, not make everything the biggest deal. This is a big deal.
Oh, this is a big deal. We get to talk over live pictures, what we were trained to do in local news. Well, it is a big deal, actually. It's a very, very big deal, but the guardrails are gone. No one in the media seems to be pointing out that this is a huge change in our entire legal system. And no one in the Democratic Party in Washington, even those who are a little bit concerned about where this might be heading, dares say anything at all, because Alvin Bragg is, of course, a holy person, and no one wants to speak out against the crowd on Twitter. So this is all happening in slow motion, and of course we're getting the dumbest possible lectures, as always, from cable news. We've learned not to put everything at 11. We're not making everything the biggest deal. It's hilarious. And of course, they can't wait to make it the biggest deal on the shallowest possible level, and the reason is economic. Since Trump left office, CNN has lost more than 60% of its viewers. Now, they're desperately trying to sell the channel because, like, it's tanking. So they have every incentive to sensationalize anything that Trump does, no matter what happens to the country in the process. So here you have a Soros-funded DA perp-walking a former president. What does this mean? What could Trump possibly be guilty of? They don't even tell you. All they tell their eager but small audience is the walls are closing in on career criminal Donald Trump. They're going to turn Trump's motorcade into OJ's Bronco, because otherwise they're going to be out of a job because nobody watches them anymore. So that's a sober assessment of what's happening in this country from CNN. Look at the plane, look at the motorcade. Before long, outlets like CNN may be your only source of information about the trial. And that's the scary thing. Imagine a system where the person who's been charged is no longer allowed to defend himself. Oh, are you seeing the connection here? Like the parking garage attendant who was shot by a criminal, he gets arrested. Like Jose Alba, who tried to save his own life from a lunatic in his bodega, he gets arrested. The people who are the victims of the tyranny don't get to speak. CNN speaks for them. Imagine that. There are multiple reports tonight that Alvin Bragg's office will seek a gag order when Trump is arraigned. Now, that would prevent Trump, on pain of going to prison, from talking about his case in public. But CNN and MSNBC and the New York Times and the Washington Post, all the completely filthy, corrupt liars in the media, handmaidens to power, they'll be able to say whatever they want. Because apparently their coverage doesn't influence the jury. Only the accused defending himself. Well, it's not only unconstitutional, baldly so, it's also completely immoral, and above all, in the middle of a presidential race, it's a subversion of democracy itself. The leading candidate from the other party doesn't get to talk, or you send him to prison? Wake up first. Where's Michael Beschloss on this? Where are all the august historians always telling us about, the architecture of our democracy, our democratic norms? Is that a democratic norm? Silencing the other party's main presidential candidate on pain of going to jail? But they like the power, and they're going to continue to exercise it until somebody stops them. Today, the mayor of New York City, a grave disappointment. We thought would be a good mayor, hasn't been a good mayor. It's sad. So to divert attention from his own ineptitude and the hours he spends at bars at night, he's now decided to become a political celebrity. So he's now threatening to jail a member of Congress, Marjorie Taylor Greene, if she dares to protest Donald Trump's arraignment in a way that he doesn't like. Watch this.
While there may be some rabble-rousers thinking about coming to our city tomorrow, our message is clear and simple. Control yourselves. New York City is our home, not a playground for your misplaced anger. People like Marjorie Taylor Greene, who is known to spread misinformation and hate speech, she stated she's coming to town. While you're in town, be on your best behavior. As always, we will not allow violence or vandalism of any kind. And if one is caught participating in any act of violence, they will be arrested and held accountable.
New York City's our home. That's why we let people crap on the sidewalk and hookers turn tricks in the vestibule of ATM machines. Really, it's your home? Your home is filthy. And you're in...
Wouldn't it have been great if they talked like that during Black Lives Matter? Can you imagine black leaders, Democratic leaders, urban leaders standing up and saying, after the death of George Floyd, control yourselves? I don't remember any Democratic leader getting up and saying, control yourselves. I can't remember any Republican leader who stood up in American public life and said to George Floyd protesters, control yourselves. Like, who stood up and said, be on your best behavior? Did corporations say, be on your best behavior or we're not going to fund you? I mean, corporations funded the Black Lives Matter terrorism. Like the Fortune 500 companies were eager to pour funds into the Black Lives Matter terrorist group. I mean, we won't allow violence and vandalism. Can you imagine people saying that to George Floyd protesters? They wouldn't have had the balls. Nobody said that. I don't even think Donald Trump said that. Who in the media said to George Floyd protesters that we won't allow violence or vandalism? If you do it, we will highlight and focus on your action and you will be forever immortalized in shame so that nobody wants to hire you. We will ruin your life if you engage in violence and vandalism because that would be a desecration of the great and holy name of George Floyd. No one said that. I can't think of any Republicans, any Democrats, any academic leaders, political leaders, Fortune 500 leaders. Just imagine if they talked that way during the George Floyd protests. But if people are rallying in support of Donald Trump, all right, then we're going to crack down on them. My God.
Competent. People like Marjorie Taylor Greene, who was known to spread hate speech. Really, what's hate speech? Well, it's speech that certain politicians hate. That's all it is. There's no hate speech prescribed in the Constitution. That's completely made up. It's a power grab, of course. Politicians didn't used to dare to talk like this because someone would call them and say, whoa, slow down. We have a Bill of Rights. But those people are hiding. And like Michael Beschloss, they're too afraid to say what's obviously true, which is we're watching the system itself collapse. So you get to just jail a former president on some fake crime for a payment he made 7 years ago that was completely legal. Once you get to do that, well, you just can go after all your political enemies with the force of law. And that's what they're doing because no one's stopping them. Today, Fox News learned that Merrick Garland's DOJ is sending subpoenas to Trump's Secret Service agents as part of their probe into his handling of classified documents. Now, if there was ever a fake crime, it's this. Everyone who's ever served in federal office, from Hillary Clinton to Joe Biden to Mike Pence, has admitted to bringing home documents in violation of the law. We have 1 billion classified federal documents, probably 2% of which deserve to be classified. The whole system is rotten and corrupt, and everybody knows it. But they're using it in order to stop someone from running for president. Okay. Is that okay with the defenders of democracy? Then there's the grand jury forewoman in Georgia going on MSNBC saying we're investigating Trump for saying the wrong things about the 2020 election. So they want to take out Trump, but in a democratic system, you do that by convincing people to vote against him. In a tyrannical system, you use people with guns to stop him from running. And that's honestly exactly what we're seeing. And even if you don't like Trump and have no intention of voting for him in this next cycle, you should have the right to vote for him because that's democracy. And anyone who takes that right away from you is a tyrant and is presiding over a system that is not democratic, but totalitarian, obviously. So to assess all of this tonight, we are joined by Candace Owens, the host of Candace, and we're always happy to have her. Candace, thanks so much for coming on. It does seem like anarcho-tyranny was one of these ideas.
Okay, thanks, Candace. Thanks for coming on. Oh my God. Wow. Okay, so it is a big deal. indicting Donald Trump, but we haven't seen the indictment yet. But it does look like, from what we have now, that this is just going to inspire, all sorts of mayhem. And Joe Biden was asleep at the wheel, right? His Justice Department could have reached out to Alvin Bragg and said, hey, we're doing a federal investigation, allow us to run things. But now we may very well have an America where presidents have to avoid all sorts of states where people who have the power to prosecute the president, right, might indict him, right? This may very well limit the ability of Democratic and Republican parties to groom presidential contenders from states that are not safe to their political party. So this could be absolutely catastrophic. And here's something related. The solution to Israel's crisis might be in America's Constitution. This is Yuval Levine. But anyway, the point, we always hear about Israel's judicial reforms, that this is a threat to Israel's democracy. But as with India, talked about this, and Christopher Caldwell's essay for the Claremont Review of Books about how India finally has majority rule. So Israel is trying to expand democracy, all right? We're trying to expand the majority rule. So in Israel, you've got a judiciary that has claimed for itself a whole variety of powers of review and nullification. It is constantly restraining government action, including action against illegal immigrants. And Israel's Supreme Court's actions frequently have absolutely no basis in law. So what the Netanyahu government doing would enhance democracy, all right? It would make, Israel probably a more democratic place. And Israeli judicial system desperately needs an overhaul. And if you're opposed to majoritarian rule, all right, you're opposed to democracy. Liberalism and democracy don't go hand in hand. They are opposed. Liberalism means that there are all sorts of rights that a political process cannot take away, right? So that's liberalism. Democracy says, the majority rules. So what Israelis who are protesting these judicial reforms are doing, right? They are marching for restraints on democracy. And same with American elites who say that the Republicans and Donald Trump are trying to squash democracy, when frequently what they want to reduce is rule by experts, right? So yeah, majority rule can be despotic, right? Minority rule can be despotic. There's no clear path forward that has no downside. But making a country more democratic, right? You should just call it. It's more democracy, right? It's less rule by experts, right? Restraining an unanchored judiciary, right, that is making decisions without a basis in law is not trying to create fascism, right? It's arguing for majority rule, which is the essential premise of democracy, right? It makes sense that parliamentary majorities would complain that courts that routinely act without a legitimate foundation in law, right, laws made by the people's representatives, are out of control. So judicial independence should not mean independence from the law. But Israel's Supreme Court is continually acting with independence from the law, right? They're striking down government appointments. They're striking down government legislation. They're protecting illegal immigrants, invaders into the country from Africa. So yeah, judges should be accountable to someone, right? Why should judicial whims or expert whims, govern us? Now, there's no one's figured it out how to deal with bureaucracies, right? You can't sue them, generally speaking, as individuals. The executive branch, legislative branch, and the judicial branch rarely have, significant oversight of bureaucracies. But what Donald Trump is promising is that if he takes power in 2024, he supposedly has 50,000 people ready and willing to take up top governmental positions. Normally, an incoming administration can only appoint about 5,000, but he's got legislation that would allow him to appoint 50,000 people to run our democracies, outrun our bureaucracies. And here's a related issue, which is important, from the Wall Street Journal op-ed. U.S. research scientists are blind to China's threat, so eager for collaboration. The National Institute of Health won't acknowledge concerns about national security. So I was talking about hero systems yesterday. Wherever you stand, whatever profession you're in, whatever your peer group, right, you're going to be profoundly affected. And when you bind with people, you also become blinded. So how do you think I enjoy going to synagogue, right, after some alt-right nut job has like shut up a synagogue or shut up a mosque or shut up a Walmart in El Paso, and I get to hear, oh, Luke's friends are at it again, right? Every time some 1488 nutter like goes off and starts murdering people, I have to go to shul and hear about, oh, Luke's friends are out there murdering people again, right? How do you think that makes me feel? That's absolutely no fun. Right, so I have to use some good judgment with with my guests and with the tenor of my show, right? I don't like being told, oh, Luke's friends are shooting up a Walmart, right? That's not fun. So every tie you have, I don't want to live a life without ties, but every tie you have, every profession you're in comes with blind spots. So after COVID hit in 2020, you had all these U.S. public health agencies just jumping out to unwarranted conclusions that Chinese scientists had done absolutely nothing deliberate, nothing accidental. They didn't make any mistakes. They did nothing towards causing the COVID pandemic. We had scientists at the National Institutes of Health, scientists at the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Disease, just continuing to defend engagement with China on pathogen research, like just shoveling all this valuable information and technology to China so that we continue to, work together with China hand in hand, because this is the bias of certain scientists. Like many virologists want, freedom to practice gain-of-function research, to practice, very dangerous, viral experimentation that may well have unleashed COVID on the world, that may well unleash something far worse than COVID on the world. And they want the freedom to just share information and to experiment with this dangerous stuff. And all government research agencies, all groups, all right, we all have different cultures. And U.S. public health agencies are rooted in open science, right? Just like economists overwhelmingly tend to be in favor of free trade, open trade. Well, U.S. public health experts tend to be rooted in open science, right? That scientific collaboration should be just encouraged globally, and that geopolitics should not constrain cooperation between researchers. But there's very little consideration given to the national security implications of joint research or the national security implications of free trade. So economists, when they talk about, moving inputs around, they never consider that some groups are far more productive than other groups. They just, treat individuals and labor inputs as though they're all alike, which of course is absolutely absurd. So there's all this credible information now about the risks of partnering with China, even in research, and our public health agencies ignore this information. They refuse to acknowledge that research can have national security implications. Now, there are federal agencies that do consider national security implications of scientific research, such as the Energy Department, which came out and said that it suspects that a lab leak was very likely the cause of COVID. So the Energy Department's national laboratories conduct highly classified research as well as open science work. And it's not like one approach is always better. Events, my dear boy, events determine which approach is better. Situations determine which approach is better. Right? So around 2017, the Energy Department's national laboratories started having significant concerns about biosecurity with regard to China. And so you had a Chinese general at that time declaring an interest in using gene sequencing and editing to develop pathogenic bioweapons that would target specific ethnic groups. Right? Then the Commerce Department ordered export restrictions on dangerous biotechnology to China, but the National Institutes of Health, the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Disease, they refused to go along with this. They refused to believe there are any risks involved in collaborating with Chinese labs. Right? They have this indiscriminate commitment to open science, along with many other virologists and other related scientists. They're so committed to open science, it completely blinds them to threats. Even when you've got a country like China open about its intentions to develop, dangerous biotechnology that would just target specific ethnic groups. So public health agencies increased their funding and increased their cooperation with China after 2017, after you had this Chinese general saying, oh, we need to research, how to wipe out specific ethnic groups. The Energy Department, meanwhile, wanted Congress to restart a biosecurity effort at the national laboratories. And so these funds started flowing in December 2019, right before COVID began spreading across the US. So the Energy Department has led the way with the Human Genome Project with gene editing. They were quickly able to evaluate the novel coronavirus, and this informed the rapid development of COVID vaccines. Compared this with the culture of the National Institute of Health, right? The NIH was unwilling to acknowledge that China had admitted its interests in pathogenic bioweapons. After COVID hit, the National Institute of Health instinctively jumped in to defend China, would not objectively analyze the circumstance. And we've got a public health bureaucracy that is just all for open science and just completely have their guard down against the ability of bad actors to make bioweapons and turn them into weapons of mass destruction. It takes, a huge national effort to make a nuclear weapon, but just a small group of biologists in a provincial laboratory can easily develop transmissible pathogens that can kill millions of people. Right? We know the Chinese Communist Party steals intellectual property, lies about it. We shouldn't be adopting an open science or an open free trade experiment. That's insane.
The most hard asset the U.S. government owns, and that's a concern when you consider it is now at its lowest level in 40 years. And that is true because the Biden administration has sent this oil to foreign countries, including China. The administration also released the oil to combat rising gas prices caused by inflation from its own policies. So it's a huge problem. Again, this is a hard asset owned by the U.S. government. Unlike the U.S. dollar, it will always have value, so we need to fill it up. But we may not be able to, and we can't because we don't make that much oil anymore. And the Saudis look like they're not swooping in to rescue us as they have so many times in the past because they have been completely alienated by the Biden administration. Saudi now says it's going to cut oil output by 500,000 barrels per day. Biden was just asked about this. It's not a big deal, he said.
Mr. President, on OPEC, do you have any reaction to the oil production cuts, sir? OPEC! On OPEC!
Brian Brenberg is the co-host of the Big Money Show on Fox Business. He joins us on this story tonight. Brian, thanks so much for coming on. Yep. This is one of those stories that people seem to be missing, but it seems to have inherent significance, Strategic Petroleum Reserve being, I think, the most valuable thing that we own. What do you think this means that the Saudis are not stepping up as they have before?
Well, the Biden administration did two things. On the one hand, they alienated Saudi Arabia, but worse, they handed Saudi Arabia all the leverage. Saudi Arabia is calling the shots on oil. We used to do that. Like 3 years ago, we would have decided where the price of oil is going to be in the world market. We don't anymore. Saudi Arabia does. So we're stuck. And the Biden administration, in the meantime, drained our strategic petroleum reserves. We can't dip into those. And the chance they had to fill it up again over the past few weeks, few months, they didn't do anything about it. So the bottom line is we are now taking what Saudi Arabia wants to give instead of making the decisions we need to make to keep people in America safe and secure and prosperous and get the economy going again. We've given it all up, Tucker.
I guess two quick things. One, have the people who decided to sell our Strategic Petroleum Reserve to China been indicted or imprisoned? And two, why didn't someone tell Biden when he was running around saying we don't need fossil fuels that actually in the adult real life world the rest of us live in, we have to have fossil fuels, period. Well, why didn't no one say that?
He didn't hire those advisors, Tucker. You know that as well as I do. He's got nobody in his administration who is telling him the truth on these things. And look, let's be clear about this. Even though in the run-up to an election, Biden pretended like high oil prices were a problem, they're not. He's got trillions of subsidies he's got to give away for green energy. That doesn't work if oil prices are low. So this actually works to his benefit in the program he's running. It's not about your price at the pump. It's about his agenda. That's why he can stand on those steps and say it's not going to be that big of a deal. It's not to him. This is helpful to his agenda. It's not helpful to your agenda, but your agenda isn't his, and you got to start there if you want to understand what's going on right now.
Really quick.
Okay, looking at the chat, Art Bell says Luke looks rattled finding out that his videos brought Stephen J. James to the alt-right. And Bernard says, above all, the polemical character determines the use of the word political, regardless of whether the adversary is designated as non-political in the sense of harmless or vice versa. If one wants to disqualify or denounce him as political, to portray oneself as non-political in the sense of being purely scientific, purely moral, purely juristic, purely aesthetic, and thereby superior. That's from Carl Schmitt, The Concept of the Political. Rustin Shackelford says experts are our betters, so we must obey. My God, I can't believe that I radicalized Stephen J. James.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So, yeah, I agree with you. I wish I could have them on.
It seems like you're kind of cursed then.
I remember what I wanted to say about it actually now. Sorry, everybody. This is worse than the Kino Casino's pause game, isn't it? But at least we're talking about it with some actual insight from having watched Luke for a long time. So this was a question that was always wondered about in the background and by many of Luke's guests himself. How much pushback was he getting from the Jews in his real life, from the Jews at his shul, at his synagogue, or whatever you call it? How?
Yeah, just the friendly remarks. Oh, your friends, shut up. Another Walmart. Great, thanks a lot. Luke's friends are at it again in Christchurch, and Luke's friends are at it again in Buffalo. Great, thanks, guys.
Much did they care about the fact that he was on a weeknight, on a Sunday, leaving the synagogue, rushing home, and firing up a live stream and having Wignats versus Jews on his stream, and talking about Richard Spencer and interviewing Mike Enoch, and then going back to the synagogue for the free buffet. Or whatever. How much did this bother them? And some people...
He was kicked out of quite a few of them.
Yeah, but that was all before this. Oh. That was more for the porn stuff. He even wrote a book about it called Rebel Without Shul. Mm-hmm. And that was for writing about the porn industry. Basically, they're like, we can't be associated with you anymore. You're supposedly orthodox and you're talking about porn. I think that's what all that was. Pretty sure he's just been at the same synagogue, attached to the same one. I don't know how it works personally, but attached to the same one there. Certainly for the time period that we're analysing of his YouTubing about the alt-right. But it was always something that everybody wondered about in the background. I remember a stream probably in 2018, perhaps right in the middle, in the height of the summer of Luke Ford, as I call it, 2018 there, or it could have been 2019, a stream that was had with Melky Casey and Dennis Dale and some other people.
That was about the time when I joined, 2018, the summer of.
But I remember this stream that was had on the side to say, what the fuck is Luke doing? What is he actually doing here? Because they couldn't believe that he was broaching these questions of the Jewish question, essentially. Because if be under no mistake, ladies and gentlemen, as I've said before, if you're Wignat, you'll probably resent it being said. You'll probably disagree and say, no, we talked about the Jewish question the most, idiot. We named the Jew over here on heel turn or something like that. Of course, that went on. But nowhere was the Jewish question being dissected as much in the environment of Jews talking about it with Wignats, essentially. Then on Luke Ford's show. And I remember this stream that went on with Casey and Dennis Dale on the side, and maybe Brundlefly was on it as well. But I remember Casey and Brundle for about 2 hours. I think it was 2018 because it was red hot. I remember I was gardening. It was really sunny, and I was listening to it. And they were like, what? They're trying to work out what is Luke up to. Is he secretly on our side? Is he secretly one of us? Is he secretly doing this to undermine the Jews? What's going on? And nobody could there was also this sense that Luke would be playing on both sides of the issue whilst also straddling the fence. And so this was essentially something that was going on right from the early days here with Luke. And it was a question, what kind of effect was this having in his real life? And what did his rabbi and the other people, the influential Jews who turn up to see on a Saturday, think about this? Were they aware of it? Did he get pushback from it? And it's something he's been very coy or cagey about.
Yeah, I get a lot of comments like, Luke's friends are at it again. Great. All right, mate. So much to talk about here. The cost of Joe Biden's democracy fixation, right? So instead of just pursuing the national interest, Joe Biden is supposedly trying to wage a battle for democracy versus autocracy. And it doesn't really help, because if we are going to get serious about dealing with China, we need to assemble and cultivate a coalition of countries that are anything but liberal and democratic, right? This is Walter Russell Mead in the Wall Street Journal. So if we want any kind of Southeast Asian strategy at all, we have to work with countries like Vietnam, Thailand, Cambodia, Laos, Myanmar, all of which count as not free on the Freedom House scale, and countries like India, Indonesia, Malaysia, Singapore, Nepal, Fiji, Papua New Guinea, and Sri Lanka, right? Unless we can bring these partly free countries into our network, we have zero chance holding the balance against China. Central Asia, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, Turkmenistan all rate as not free. Do we really want to write off this part of the world? If we want to keep Middle East oil producers from aligning with our enemies, we need to work with some very undemocratic governments. And if we want to counter China in Africa, we have to work with imperfect governments in Angola, Nigeria, Ethiopia, and Sudan. So to alienate these countries through vacuous posturing about our sincerity as human rights crusaders would be absolutely stupid, but that is the path that we are on under the Biden administration. Right, here's Dennis Prager today.
Nobody wants to say that because they wish to villainize Donald Trump, so much so that USA Today, which is a rag sheet on the level of Pravda, Trump using anti-Semitic rhetoric to raise money after indictment. Oh, really?
To say that the USA Today is on the level of Pravda is just hysterical analysis. To say it's just a rag sheet, it's just a typical American newspaper struggling to pay the bills. It's fairly centrist. My God, to say that the USA Today is the equivalent of Pravda is hysteria. You know, you think it unworthy of a 12-year-old girl, but you know, that's the type of crap that Dennis Prager is pumping out here.
So what's an example of that? Trump attacked Manhattan prosecutor Alvin Bragg. Is he Jewish? Okay, just checking. Whose office was responsible for bringing the case to the grand jury as being funded by George Soros, a major donor to Democratic causes and a popular target of anti-Semitism on the far right. That's it? I see. Well, let me say as a Jew who has done more to fight anti-Semitism than almost any living Jew, who smuggled to the Soviet Union in my 20s, smuggled in Jewish items for Jews, smuggled out names of Jews to leave, who wanted to leave to Israel, or just leave, period, and could do so through Israel, who was on the Holocaust Memorial Board, who has written a book on anti-Semitism that has gone into 3 editions and is still widely read. And
this is something I enjoy about Jews. Jews like feeling good about themselves. Jews feel, in general, not every Jew, but there is a cultural tendency here. Jews feel much more comfortable, you know, reeling off their accomplishments than do Anglos.
Who has brought more goodwill to Jews than the entire Anti-Defamation League, which has probably brought more ill will to Jews than goodwill. So let me say with those criteria that this is a damn liar, this Aaron Mansfield, this piece of crap who wrote this goddamn lie, excuse me.
He calls her a piece of crap. I mean, I said that Prager's analysis was crappy. I wouldn't say that Prager's a piece of crap. It sounds like this woman has written a misguided, wrong-headed, even boneheaded and stupid op-ed. Doesn't make her a piece of crap. This is just one expression of her. She may well, in her spare time, be caring for her sick mother. She may be looking after her children. She may have done, you know, all sorts of wonderful things in her life. Do we all want to be, you know, judged by the most boneheaded and stupid things that we've done? Dennis Prager is just completely unhinged. Like, on Friday, he was calling Democrats termites, right? Now he's calling USA Today the equivalent of Pravda. He glories in talking about how the United States is engaged in a civil war. I mean, if you've been in a real civil war, right, you wouldn't be talking about America being in a civil war. 95% of Americans don't care much about politics, right? You can go and have a very productive, very happy life without fighting about politics with people. But Dennis wants people to start fighting about politics, wants people to blow up their lives and go public with their political positions, which is just insane. This is just insane. I remember I was a big Dennis Prager fan in the 1980s because he was fun to listen to compared to many talk show hosts. He's fairly balanced. He was also very kind to me. I gained a lot from listening to him. But one thing I noticed fairly early on was that his advice was frequently just awful, just absolutely awful. And the advice he has here from Friday's show is just terrible.
Anyway, it's the happiness hour, and I'll tell you more ways not to despair. You have to fill your life with kindred spirits, so you'll know you're not alone.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, try to fill your life with kindred spirits. That's a great idea.
You're not alone. There are millions, even in California, there are millions of people who think as you do, who hold the same values you do. Millions. Your only job is to find 5 of them. That shouldn't be impossible. It is not.
And that's a good point. If you just can find 2, 3, 4, 5 friends, you're in pretty good shape.
Not impossible. One of the only ways to do it, though, is to get out of the closet, which means that you...
No, you don't have to go public. All right, you can use, all sorts of proxies to, find people with whom you have comfortable political, cultural, religious views. You don't have to come out of the closet and let everyone know that you think this indictment is going to incite a civil war. This is terrible advice.
Will also make enemies. But isn't the price worth it?
For some people, yeah, they might make more friends than enemies. Other people will make more enemies than friends. Some people will make, more enemies than they can handle. All right. You want to have the best possible relations with everyone, right? You want to have the best possible relations with your mother. And so if that means you don't talk about politics with your mother, don't talk about politics with your mother. You want the best possible relations with your father. You want the best possible relations with your siblings. You want the best possible relations with your uncles and aunties and cousins, co-workers, neighbors, co-religionists, people you meet in Starbucks. You want the best possible relations with everyone. You don't want to blow up your relationships or possible relationships with other people. So some people, the best possible relationship you'll have with them is virtually no relationship at all. But having no relationship at all with someone who would absolutely hate you if you started speaking out on politics, all right, it's far, far, far preferable to have no relationship with someone than to have, that person dedicated to ruining your life. So this idea that you should go public condemning Donald Trump's indictment so that you can make friends is, I think, really bad advice.
Wouldn't you be willing to get enemies in order to get friends? Of course.
Yeah, but it's not necessary, right? You don't have to make enemies to find friends with whom you share, common values. Right? You don't have to go posting on social media your political views. You don't have to share them socially to find friends with whom you have common values.
It's the only way to do it in a civil...
That's terrible. It's not the only way to do it. Just use some discretion. Use some good judgment. You go to an Orthodox synagogue, the odds are about 80% that the people who are there will vote Republican. You go, if you're an evangelical Christian, right, go to an evangelical Christian church, right, the odds are really good that you'll find a lot of Republicans. So let's get another burst of Tucker Carlson here.
My aspiration is.
So that seems honestly like a more normal aspiration, taking your boy to a restaurant. But CBS News wants him to run for president. You can't overstate how repulsive a lot of journalists are. Most.
About John
Dr. Mark
Fetterman.
Siegel joins us tonight to assess what we saw in this interview. Doctor, what do you think of this?
Tucker, first of all, I can't believe that she asked him if he's running for president. Even before the Depression, the chances of him surviving the term are less than 50% from the kind of stroke he had, and he has a bad heart. Then we find out that he's had chronic depression, which nobody told the voters of Pennsylvania about. He's been suffering it for years. On the positive side, I thought that he was good coming forward and saying I couldn't get out of bed, I didn't want to eat, I was losing weight, I had no happiness in my life, I couldn't celebrate my son's 14th birthday, and I had to be hospitalized because depression is a disease that's so often stigmatized, and over 10% of Americans suffer from severe depression. So in saying that, he makes it less stigmatized. On the other hand, What was he doing in the hospital for 6 weeks? The usual hospitalization is 6 to 10 days. How come, if he's being transparent, we're not finding out what the treatment was there? And you just pointed out there's issues with hearing. That's related to his stroke. You know, there's the issue of that he has a 60% chance or more of recurrent depression, that he goes back in the hospital, all of which leads me to my main point. We feel bad for him. We like that he came forward. We feel compassion for him on a personal level. But what about the voters of Pennsylvania? What about the 14 million people in Pennsylvania? What about the people in the United States who have a Senate that's so divided that every vote matters? And is he up to voting? Is he fit to serve? I have serious concerns about that, and so should every American. Tucker.
That's exactly right. Dr. Mark Siegel, thank you so much.
Thank you.
10% of Americans have depression. They tell you it's all chemical imbalance in the brain. That's a lie. Some of it may be. But depression is also a product of living a life you're not supposed to be living. And if your mercenary wife and all the political consultants around you tell you have to be in the U.S. Senate and you don't want to be in the U.S. Senate, you're not ready to serve in the U.S. Senate, maybe it gives you depression. That's not crazy, actually, as an explanation. Those people should have to answer for it, who did this to him. So it's kind of interesting that you're not hearing our leaders talk that much about black people anymore. Remember, all the neoliberals were obsessed telling you about black people. Why aren't they talking about black people anymore? 3 years after George Floyd, actually the lives of many African Americans, real people, have gotten a lot worse. Following the 2020 Floyd riots, African American deaths by homicide reached levels never seen before in this country. Someone should stop and ask, why is that? But no one in the Democratic Party is, because they don't care. They don't have to care, because they have a new class of victims to exploit for political power. Out with black people, in with transgenderists. We're going to exploit their suffering to become more powerful. And of course, big corporations are taking the lead, as they always do. Bud Light just honored a man who dresses up like a little girl called Dylan Mulvaney. Watch this.
I got some Bud Lights for us. So, I kept hearing about this thing called March Madness, and I thought we were all just having a hectic month, but it turns out it has something to do with sports. And I'm not sure exactly which sport, but either way, it's a cause to celebrate. This month, I celebrated my day 365 of womanhood, and Bud Light sent me possibly the best gift ever, a can with my face on it.
So do you think that the people in charge care about that person or any transgender person? Really, if they did, they might ask questions like, is the suicide rate among young people who are getting hormone treatments rising or falling? Because if you cared, you'd want to know that. They don't want to know. They don't care. You think Sandy Cortez even thinks about that? No. The point is getting power from the suffering of others. And if you've decided you're another sex, you're definitely suffering on many, many levels. But point that out and you get attacked. That happened to our friend Billboard Chris in Canada. He went to a trans rally in Vancouver on Friday. Here's what happened to him while there.
You suck. You suck. You. You're not wanted. You're a idiot.
So who's the aggressor there? Well, it wasn't the man who calls himself Billboard Chris. He was assaulted. And when he reported his assault to the, air quotes here, police, the police refused to investigate.
Within seconds, I was surrounded, not allowed to walk freely, pushed. As you can see, my nose is bleeding.
They just walked up to him and assaulted him.
You want to see? Where's the video?
I have it on my camera, but I'm
Are you gonna
filming
show it
right
to me?
now. Yeah, I can show it to you.
How about you show it to me?
Are you going to do something about it if I do?
If I actually see an assault and not a claim of an assault.
Through your nose?
No, that's
How do you think that happened, man? You think he did it to himself or something?
People can do these things to hurt themselves on purpose.
You don't honestly think that
I've got a police officer here
just
thinking I scratched myself on purpose. This is hilarious.
Oh, the rosy-cheeked face of tyranny. She could be working in the Citibank HR department. Maybe she will be someday. And she's not the only one. The police chief, the deputy police chief rather, Howard Chow of Vancouver, has taken her side. He says he's appalled, not that people are being bashed in the face for their political views, but because some people don't like the fact the police didn't respond. He hasn't condemned the militants who attacked that man. That's because in Canada, as in this country, militants with the right cause, the trans cause, can do whatever they want. They can even kill Christian children in school, and they're the victims. So a story that happened last week, a Wall Street Journal reporter arrested in Russia, being held for spying. Is there any way to get this man out? 31 years old, his family's distraught, of course. We'll bring you an update.
Okay, keep an eye on the news as it happens, as it goes down. Let's have a look at the chat. Outbell says, with Dennis Prager, I have to wonder what his ratings are like. Maybe he is in a corner. Maybe he's boxed in, at risk of losing his show. Comes off as unhinged, anxious, and thrashing. Luke is steady on air. I hope so. I would like to think that my self-perception is I'm a fairly steady, happy guy, and I don't feel the need to lash out at the Democrats and call them a bunch of termites. And the USA Today is just like Pravda, and the United States is in a civil war right now. It's just insane, some of the things that Dennis is saying. Here he is from Friday's show.
Civil War, which I said we were in 20 years ago.
Right. He loves promoting that we're in a civil war. Do you know how bad that is to be pumping that out into the country? I know it's an attention getter. I know it's very exciting for people. I know that it's probably good for ratings to do videos that we're in a civil war. It makes you more significant because you're a fighter in this civil war. But anyone who's really been in a civil war where people are getting slaughtered would have contempt for this analogy, right? How many people are getting slaughtered in America's civil war right now? How many Republicans are being murdered deliberately by Democrats on the basis of political affiliation? I'm not aware of that. We have crime problems in this country, but it's not generic Democrats going after people who are Republicans and just slaughtering them.
One of the only ways to do it, though, is to get out of the closet, which means that you will also make enemies. But isn't the price worth it? Wouldn't you be willing to get enemies in order to get friends? Of course. It's the only way to do it in a civil war, which I said we were in 20 years ago, and is now is obvious.
He's proud that 20 years ago, for 20 years, he's been saying we're in a civil war, and he's saying now it's obvious that we're in a civil war. So you're hyping up hostility to outgroups beyond a level that is functional, right? Walking around with a 2 or a 3 in intensity, with antipathy towards outgroup and preference for your in-group, that is perfectly functional. But if you go to work with the attitude that America's in a civil war, if you ride a bus, get on a subway, interact with strangers, talk to people in a bar, right? You live your life with this Dennis Prager mindset that we're in a civil war, that the Democrats are termites and pieces of crap, right? That's highly dysfunctional. That's terrible for your happiness. It's terrible for your effectiveness. It's terrible for your mental health. It's terrible for your relationships. It's terrible for your relationships with your family, with your friends, with your community, with strangers, with people you work with. This is just absolutely poisonous rhetoric. And why? Why does a good man like Dennis Prager, who's devoted his life to teaching goodness and God-based ethics, who's written a book on happiness, who's delivered hundreds of lectures on happiness, why is he pumping out poison? Because he's in a particular situation where the whole business model for what he does depends upon drilling into his listeners that they are victims and that he is fighting for them against all the institutions and everyone powerful in society who's aligned against them. You're a victim. He's fighting for you. It's a civil war. He's fighting for you in the civil war. Right? That's a very exciting rhetorical strategy to get listeners. It's an exciting rhetorical strategy to have a prestigious position in society. It is at the cost. He's pumping poison into the bloodstream of America. Right? This may well be more damaging, more destructive, cause more loss of life than real corporations who are pumping real chemicals into the water or the air, right? The tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, possibly millions of people who over the course of 20 years, Dennis has spoken to millions of people, about this idea that we're in a civil war, to the extent that people get hyped up and start regarding Democrats as pieces of crap and as termites, and taking on this attitude that we're in a civil war, this is just absolute poison. And he's doing it because he's in a situation where he needs to say these things, because the whole business model for his fame, right, his whole business model for his high status, his whole business model for having a nationally syndicated radio show, his whole business model for then going out and teaching about God-based ethics, right, it is all based on a foundation of pumping poison into the American bloodstream. Without daily pumping poison into the American bloodstream, he wouldn't have this status, he wouldn't have this prestige, he wouldn't have a nationally syndicated radio show, he wouldn't have this really sweet position in life. But it comes at the cost of just pouring out poison, making people less happy and less effective. I just tell you, go listen to a typical Dennis Prager show. And when I was a huge Dennis Prager fan, I would notice that I was less happy consistently after listening to his show. Far more often, by a ratio of about 3-to-1, 5-to-1, I was consistently less happy than I was happy after listening to his show. And I experienced that while I was a huge fan of his. So it's not that Dennis Prager is a bad person. Dennis Prager is a pretty good bloke in a situation where he has succumbed to the temptations of the situation to pump out poison to maintain his prestigious position.
You need kindred spirits. That will cheer you up. You know where I will be tonight, Friday night? At a Shabbat dinner with my group of 12. And
yeah, Glenn Bentley makes a good point that back in his heyday, back in 1994, I believe, when Dennis Prager had a nationally syndicated TV show, he was too mellow for his nationally syndicated TV show. He was too mellow for the New York market. I think he took the lesson from that. I can't afford to be so mellow. Dennis Prager used to be a pretty mellow, pretty happy guy. But I think he experienced the pain, possibly humiliation, of losing his nationally syndicated TV show, losing his New York radio show on WABC, just like Tucker Carlson. Tucker Carlson used to be a really sensible, superb journalist, thoughtful, fair, balanced, but he had failures in his TV punditry days, and so he learned that the way to maintain high ratings is to pump out hate porn. And I enjoy Tucker, and I think he's often on the side of the angels, but I also recognize that much of what he does is gratuitous hate porn. The same with Dennis Prager. I like much of what Dennis Prager says, but both Dennis and Tucker pump out inordinate amount of hate porn, which enables them to have these prestigious positions, nationally syndicated radio host, Fox News pundit with over 3 million viewers a day, but it comes at the cost of pumping poison into the American bloodstream.
Visitors that come. And I did that the entire lockdown.
Right. So if everyone had done what Dennis Prager did during the lockdown, tens of thousands, possibly hundreds of thousands of more Americans would have died.
We missed getting together 2 Friday nights. That was it. When we realized that the lockdowns were vile, were crushing, as they turned out to be, with zero science behind it. It is a major source of my joy.
This notion that the lockdowns had zero science behind them. Now, there is very good analysis indicating that some of the lockdowns were too strict, they went on too long, that the price paid for some of the lockdowns was beyond the benefits of the lockdowns. There's also evidence for benefit from the lockdown. So it's not like there's zero science, one side or another. All right, there are hot debates on the efficacy of lockdowns. May those debates continue until we get clarity. But this notion that there was zero science behind a lockdown, I mean, if you just knew something about the Spanish influenza of 1918, 1919, when tens of thousands of Americans died, right, you couldn't be so cavalierly dismissive of lockdowns. If you have an influenza that is as deadly as COVID or more deadly than COVID, right? Let's say we get another influenza that's 5 times as deadly as COVID, we would have at least 5 times more incentive to lock down.
joy of life. You must find kindred spirits. I have other recommendations. We return. Hi, everybody. The Happiness Hour. And I never miss it on a Friday, no matter how bad the news. On the contrary, when the news is bad.
Right. This is the Happiness Hour, telling people we're in a civil war. Get happy, guys. We're in a civil war. It's obscene.
Is when we most need the Happiness Hour. Although even in happy times, I started it much happier times because a lot of people were still miserable. In fact, it's miserable people who have created the crisis. Happiness is a moral obligation, is an insight that I have brought to millions of people, and it is both macro and micro true. You owe it to the people in your life to have a happy disposition.
Yeah, that's a great point. And how can listening to someone harangue that Democrats are termites and that we're in a civil war, really, how does that make the ordinary listener, how does that make him a little bit more happy?
And to brush away your bad moods just as you brush away your bad breath. You can inflict these moods on others. And it is true in the macro that it's a moral obligation because the happy make the world better. As I say, almost every happiness hour at the beginning of the hour. I have no problem with that word. Some of you do. I hope God does damn this lie. When you charge anti-Semitism when it doesn't exist, what you do is
Okay, this is Prager from today.
Foment anti-Semitism and cheapen the word, which is what USA Today does and the entire left does. The left is an enemy of the Jews, as it is an enemy of mankind, but most Jews don't know it. So yes, that is the state of our of the antipathy toward Donald Trump, that you can lie 100%. You could just lie. You make up things. He is a George Soros-funded DA. That is enough to condemn him, because George Soros is as close to diabolic as it gets on this planet. Not because he's
Okay, I just don't find it useful to call people diabolical. George Soros has, a certain perspective on the world, which in some situations is probably an adaptive one. I think in America, right, funding, more permissive criminal justice attitudes and laws and enforcement is just terrible. It's absolutely awful. In another situation, it might be adaptive. So George Soros is a human being, all right? He's done some good things in his life. I generally disagree with his policies, but he's still a complicated human being. I just don't see sufficient benefit in calling people diabolical, right? I don't think it makes you more effective in life. I think it's much better to just understand, where is George Soros coming from? What does George Soros stand for? What is his track record? Like, what type of person thinks the way that George Soros does? How would someone like George Soros experience the world that leads them to the point of view that they have? Right, some great comments in the chat. Let me roll through them. The Termite Hour. Has Tucker commented on all the reporting that Tucker sent all these emails saying he hates Trump? Not to the best of my knowledge. Bill says some things are black and white. Elliot Blatt comments, let's talk about COVID for now. Let's talk about collapsing regional banks. That's a real morale booster. Does Dennis Prager's audience even have the health to participate in a civil war? Aren't they old and obese, presumably? XM Radio needs customers, Luke. Emailed a podcast at 2 years for $5 a month. And he got it for $3 a month. You get a musket. You get a musket. You get a musket. Chat says guerrilla mindset over the Prager mindset. Bell says Dennis could be in a ratings war. He better be. Using civil war as Tim Pool's clickbait game. Get out of the closet is an unusual call to action. The amount of Democrats against conservative attacks is higher than that of Wignats. Laponius says that Dennis Prager is being irresponsible. Laponius knows that Tucker Carlson has been springing a lot of wrongfully accused felons from prison lately. All right, let's get a little bit more from Dennis Prager from today.
A Jew. He doesn't even identify as a Jew. Isn't on the left all that matters what you identify as? All of a sudden, you are what you're born. You're not the sex you're born, but you're the ethnicity you're born. Isn't that cool? The left. They say what they want to say for the ends they wish to achieve, because truth is not a left-wing value. Soros has as much to do with Judaism, Jews, or Israel as a rural Mongolian, with the exception that the rural Mongolian doesn't do damage to the world like George Soros does. So yes, it is a remarkable article in the USA Today front page today. And a lot of the readers, to the extent that the USA Today has readers, will believe this lie. The writer probably believes the lie. The left presents an interesting moral problem. If you believe your lies, are you lying? I don't know the answer to that. Do you have to know that what you say is a lie in order for it to be a lie?
Yes.
Do you have an answer to that question?
You have to know. Yes.
It's a very hard question.
Yes.
The damage is actually great.
No, it's not hard to know. You have to believe your lies. It's not a lie. If you believe that what you're saying is true, it is not a lie.
If you believe your lie, then there's no hope for you. And that's why there's no hope for the left. There's hope for some liberals, but not much. The issue is the independent and the conservative, to make them aware of the...
Okay, this idea that there's just no hope for liberals, there will be people with liberal left-wing tendencies, all right, that's the language we use now, thousands of years from now, right? Liberal left-wing tendencies have existed for thousands of years, meaning tendencies towards openness to strangers, reduced, levels of out-group hostility, more egalitarianism, more openness to experimenting with different ways of organizing communities and families. All right, we've had these, what we call now left and right tendencies, but they're evolutionary adaptations. All right, the left has certain impulses that people have evolved over thousands of years and have proved adaptive to reality. The right has impulses and adaptations to reality as well. And in certain circumstances, the left-wing ones turn out to be more adaptive, and so people get to pass on their genes. And the right-wing tendencies in other situations prove to be less adaptive, so fewer people pass on their genes. Right now, it looks like left-wing people are less likely to pass on their genes in the United States, and right-wing people, seems to me, have a more adaptive strategy for dealing with the United States as it is right now. But situations change constantly. Events, my dear boy, events. So this idea that there's no hope for liberals is absurd. There will be prosperous liberals and lefties for thousands of years. Right? Liberals and lefties, are going to reproduce. They're going to have families. They're going to make money. They're going to move ahead in their careers. They're going to, lead upstanding lives at an approximate, nearly, or the same ballpark as people on the right. So this idea that there's just no hope for people with a different political point of view is just poison to take this on, right? Just imagine you take this on and you go through your day thinking that there's no hope for people who have a different political point of view from me, who don't see the Alvin Bragg indictment of Donald Trump the same way I do. Therefore, there's no hope, right? That's just poison.
Mortal threat to goodness that the left presents. The whopping outrage in Trump's indictment by former U.S. prosecutor Andrew McCarthy. There is his invocation of trivial, that is Bragg, trivial business records misdemeanors against a partisan foe, at the same time he is refusing to enforce felony offenses against ardent criminals who prey on New Yorkers.
Wait, what did he say? That was a bit much.
Presents. The whopping outrage in Trump's indictment by former U.S. prosecutor Andrew McCarthy.
I have to go back
There is
further.
his invocation of... So yes, it is a remarkable article in USA Today, front page today. And a lot of the readers, to the extent that the USA Today has readers, will believe this lie.
You know what type of people will believe that lie, or the lies that Dennis Prager puts out? People are already predisposed to believe that lie, right? People aren't going to change their minds over that article or Dennis Prager's commentary or my commentary. Only those people are already predisposed in that certain direction, right? So however heated I get against, contrary points of view, all right, these different attitudes on, big sweeping global political issues, all right, people aren't going to change their mind. They may edge a little bit, one way or another if they already have some tendencies in that direction.
Writer probably believes the lie. The left presents an interesting moral problem. If you believe your lies, are you lying?
No, you're not. It's not a difficult problem. It's very simple. If you believe that what you're saying is true, you are not technically lying.
I don't know the answer to that. Do you have to know that what you say is a lie in order for it to be a lie? Do you have an answer?
Yeah, Art Bell says Dennis Prager is going full Mark Levin. At least a step towards it. Like Mark Levin just sounds like a ranting, screaming homeless guy.
To that question?
So Dennis has often spoken that in his first 10, 15 years in radio, there was one piece of advice he was continually getting from the program director: more energy, more energy, more energy. And so Mellow Dennis didn't cut it at WABC in New York. Mellow Dennis didn't cut it as a nationally syndicated TV host. He took away from that more energy, more energy, more energy. And so what helps you get more energy? What helps you deliver a more energetic show? Upping the level of hyperbole. And so Dennis is able to psych himself into delivering the energetic show, all right, that you need to attract a high listenership. But if you have to psych yourself up to deliver an energetic show by pumping out poison, maybe it's not worth it. Now, Dennis is 74 years of age. I give him credit for, delivering a very compelling, interesting, nationally syndicated radio show. He does, pump a tremendous amount of energy. But it seems to me that what is required for him to pump out this amount of energy is that he's pouring a whole bunch of, hyperbole and, frankly, just poison into the American bloodstream. Is it really worth it to maintain a nationally syndicated radio show? Like, what if the price of maintaining a nationally syndicated radio show is your own soul and having a negative effect on the souls of thousands of people? Is it really worth it to maintain your high status position?
It's a very hard question. The damage is actually greater if you believe your lie. Then there's no hope for you, and that's why there's no hope for the left. There's hope for some liberals, but not much. The issue is the independent and the conservative, to make them aware of the mortal threat to goodness that the left presents.
The mortal threat to goodness that the left presents. Yeah, in some situations, the left presents a mortal threat to goodness. In other situations, the right is going to present a mortal threat to to goodness. Just like when I was in my more naive days earlier on in my conversion to Orthodox Judaism, I thought that, rabbis are just more moral than most people because they devote their lives to praying and studying Torah. But then I quickly realized that they're not, that they're just as likely to molest, they're just as likely to engage in financial fraud as a plumber or as a gardener or as a dentist, all right? There's nothing about inherently in observing Orthodox Judaism in America today that inherently makes anyone better. Some people use it and they become better. So many of the finest people I know are Orthodox Jews, but plenty of people practice Orthodox Judaism or Christianity or watered down forms of Judaism, and it doesn't make them any better. Some people practice it, it makes them worse. So it's not like the left is just this mortal threat to goodness, but the right is, never a mortal threat to goodness. What determines whether or not the left is going to be a mortal threat to goodness, as opposed to the right? Events, my dear boy, events. So it seems like to me that in certain events, a more left-wing approach is more adaptive, such as during COVID, more government intervention in the economy, how we run our lives, right, to a certain extent may have proved to be adaptive, but then when you had an excessive government intervention, then it became maladaptive, or if the adaptation held, on too long, then, then what was once adaptive, like 6 glasses of water a day, usually adaptive, but 12 glasses of water a day may very well be maladaptive. Art Bell says, Dennis Dale just did a short show, said his favorite city area in Portland looks terrible and that it's left him demoralized. So if I'm just taking what you said as true, if someone feels demoralized because their favorite part of a city looks terrible, that is not about that part of the city. That is about what's going on in your psyche. All right. It's possible to be happy even when things are not going your way in the wider world. Now, you want to arrange your life to have as many opportunities for happiness and getting along with people and preserving everything that you hold sacred. So yeah, if you get feel temporarily demoralized when your team doesn't win or when a favorite part of your city gets trashed, that absolutely makes sense. But if you feel demoralized for weeks and months afterwards, then that's some kind of miswiring malfunction, right? To suffer a loss, right? It is normal, natural, and even healthy to feel down, right? You lose a valuable friend, you lose an opportunity, you lose a job, you lose a opportunity at a promotion, you lose, a chance at love, you lose an opportunity at prestige, right? You lose something valuable. Yeah, it's normal, natural, healthy to feel down. Because when you then feel down, you get to recalibrate. It's like, okay, how can I do things differently now that circumstances have changed? I've experienced this key loss, right? And so to feel down, to be introspective for hours, even days, that's adaptive. But if you feel down, right, for weeks or months because you didn't get that promotion, or because politics didn't go your way, or a favorite part of the city gets trashed, then that demoralization response is maladaptive. So you want your psyche, like your wrist, to do the things that you need it to do. And a psyche that gets demoralized when the city around you is not going your way, right? It becomes maladaptive after a certain amount of time, right? You experience the pain when life doesn't go your way. When you suffer loss, yeah, you feel down and introspective. But to be adaptive to the world, you need to bounce back within days or a couple of weeks.
The whopping outrage in Trump's indictment by former U.S. prosecutor Andrew McCarthy. There is his invocation of trivial, that is Bragg, trivial business records misdemeanors against a partisan foe. At the same time, he is refusing to enforce felony offenses against hardened criminals who prey on New Yorkers. Alvin Bragg is as bad a human being to occupy that office as probably ever existed. The man is responsible, 100% responsible, for some of the murders and rapes in New York City because of his completely lenient view of violent crime. Here is the key question. If you believe that the indictment is 100% legal honesty, then you are deluding yourself in a way that renders you sort of hopeless. When a man lets rapists and people who beat people and who repeatedly rob stores and cars and carjack and even kill, when he lets them out, and I will give you a list of some of the examples of Alvin Bragg letting these people out, but then you prosecute on the flimsiest of charges the former president of the United States of America, an unprecedented act in American history, and then the New York Times, this is as important as anything, the New York Times supports this. The New York Times says this is legal, not political. So is the Washington Post and CNN, ABC, and NBC, and NPR, PBS, and CBS, and what else? LGBTQIA, and RTDDDD, and SM22226. They all say it. If it's got an acronym, the odds are it says it. Yeah, this is not political. The question is an interesting question, an important question. Well, I don't know if it is important. Is this being done in order to make sure that Donald Trump is nominated? Because there is a line of thought, which I don't find...
Yeah, that would make sense, that Democrats may well think this will help Trump secure the Republican nomination, and that Trump would be the easiest of the major Republican candidates to defeat in a general election. So right now, I would say if you get Trump versus Biden in 2024, right now, just looking at things, it seems to me about 90% likely that Biden would defeat Trump in 2024.
Easily rejected, that many Democrats believe that Donald Trump would be the easiest person to defeat of Republican nominees, easier than DeSantis, easier than Ramaswamy, and even some others. And they want to ensure that he is nominated. There's also a strand of thought that if he's serving time in prison, he can't run, and they want to make sure he doesn't run. Which do you buy?
I'm more in the latter camp.
You're more in the latter camp?
Yeah.
So you think they fear him running more than they fear him not running?
No.
We'll be back in a moment. 1-8-PRAGER 776. Natural.
Okay. Interesting question. So I would go with they think that Trump would be the easiest to defeat. All right, we've got National College Basketball Championship starting in 2 minutes. I got to run. Bye-bye.